All right, welcome back. Today I'm going to actually try and tackle something that was brought up in a recent interview that Shan Powers had with Lindsay on her channel. I'll put a link in the description. It's an exceptional interview. And I've definitely been breaking it down over the past few weeks. So, those are where those videos are coming from. But there was something that Shan mentioned in the context of both NI and SI, where she described OI as having pet projects, right? Where their minds are fixated on one thing and they lose track of the outside world because they're so focused on these pet projects. And, for me, being an EP and someone double activated OE at the top, I didn't exactly understand that. I mean, granted, I do have my own mini pet projects, but, it isn't exactly something that I felt was central to anything that I was doing. They felt like side projects. So my question was, okay, why would OI be associated with side projects? Why is that not a form of distraction, right? And why is that associated with organizing and everything associated with OI, control and things like that, as opposed to distraction, right? OE. And what the first major thing that came to my mind is the Batman archetype, right? The Batcave archetype, more specifically, where you have this cavern cut off from the outside world, and where you can really just focus on building and tinkering away at these prototypes, right? The prototype of the Batmobile, the prototype of the suit, the prototype of all these gadgets and trinkets, in this cave, and you're doing it in where no one else can see it, right? But it's kind of like a passion, right? And I think this imagery persists in a lot of movies, right? And I think, largely because I think a lot of people are copying that archetype, right? So for example, Tony Stark in the first Iron Man movie, right, where he's literally stuck in a cave, and then he has to build something, sloppily to get himself out of that situation. But then over time, he voluntarily secludes himself away in his basement and is starting to tinker away at this pet project of the Iron Man suit, right? Similar examples. I mean, well, Batman has always been kind of a classic archetype of it, but I would even go so far as to say, in several movies nowadays, especially with like superhero films, there's always this scene where there's this preparation in the cave or preparation in the lab, right? And so I kind of want to just touch base and see, like, why is this the case, right? Why is OI so fixated on these pet projects, right? Now, I would say in order for us to get a handle on this, first I'm going to go to the definitions, and then I'm going to just speak to, I guess, my understanding of what the archetype is of pet projects, or the bat cave has to teach us. So going to the checklist, or at least my checklist, this is basically my my little pet project. It's kind of this cobbled together little mess right now, but I'll put it in the description as well. OI is defined as a lot of different things, right? In a lot of different places, right? So, let me just read out the first two, because I think these are most important for this conversation. So OI is described as having a way, having a same story, concluding, stacking, stacking events, stacking timelines. But then more importantly for this conversation, when more information is needed, OI learns by revisiting familiar information sources. And it even goes to the point where I'm going to actually go to this link. This is a very old video where it's called Organize versus Gather. Ignore that. But I would definitely say, let's see here. Basically, there's this fixation on, yes, organizing, but more importantly, I'm trying to find the example of, they use an example in this video of, let's say you're trying to look for a new car, and OI, whenever it wants to do something, it gets fixated on, let's say, one website, for example, right? CarMax, for example, or whatever. And it'll fixate, and it will look at every different corner, every different crevice of CarMax to see if the car of its dreams is there, as opposed to what SE does or OE does, which is just jumping from website to website. Now, this kind of goes back to my question. Why then is OI associated with order? Why is OI associated with control? In some sense, it's almost even more scattered or more let's say, distracted in a certain sense than OE, right? Like, or maybe just as, you know, someone who's searching through CarMax looks just as chaotic to me as someone who's searching 50 different websites. I suppose the difference, though, is that you have to remember with OI, let's go back to the definition. OI is going back to a known or a familiar information source. And yes, it, during the initial stages, it's searching through that entire box, right? And it's new and it is chaotic. But since it's a known box, there eventually comes a point where all of the pathways within that, all of the pathways, all of the options, all of the material in that box become very, very, familiar, boring, expected. And it gets to the point where, regardless if it's SI or NI, you can then start to predict very common patterns that happen within that box. You can predict, certain things that, certain, let's say, rookie mistakes that people will make when they first go through the box because you've been through it so many times. And then on top of that, you do have more control or more order, in the sense of that familiarity allows you to then plan out or structure things based on the information or based on the contents of that box. So going back to this Batman archetype of the Batcave, right? Bruce Wayne's been basically locked down here for, a good, better portion of a decade. And best believe, if you've been down here working on the same thing every single day, yes, it does look kind of scattered. Just like you got some random tires in the background. You have a car that's half finished in the background. You have a suit that's probably needs upgrades and things like that. But the advantage of OI is that there comes a point, again, imagine, let's say you were down here working on the same thing for decades, right? Which is the Batman archetype. There comes a point where he probably knows every nook and cranny of this cave, every single thing, right? And yes, even though they're updating things, there's this calmness and there's a piece of, hey, I know exactly where everything is. And if I get in trouble, I know what to do to either solve the problem, or I know what I need to do to get this back up and running and things like that. As opposed to OE, where it's jumping from, let's say cave to cave, or to jumping from gadget to gadget, out in the outside world. And, yes, it may be gathering some cool things, but the problem is it doesn't fully or thoroughly know what it has in the same way that OI does when it's kind of working on these pet projects in the side, right? Now, I'm doing the best I can to explain this, but I'm not going to pretend I'm doing the best job. OI is still a demon for me. OI still lasts for me. And then on top of that, Blast is still lasts for me. So it might take me a few videos to really explain what I'm talking about. But I guess the moral of the story is I want to start to associate this OI pet projects motif that Shan introduced in the Lindsay video with this Batman archetype, right? Like this guy tinkering away for the 9th year, the 10th year, the 20th year in a row with whatever pet projects is on this computer of his, right? And probably the same pet projects that Alfred has had to hear this dumbass talk about every single time they're down here, right? What else? Oh, I guess one last thing I did want to do is share with you an example of what these pet projects look like, I guess, in my life, right? So for me, again, this is like a demon state. I'm not going to pretend I'm really good at this, but I do have pet projects. I have, like, for example, my linear versus circular checklist that I'm slowly chipping away at. There are certain theories that I'm very fascinated by that I return to on a frequent basis. So I have, like, my docs where I'm building them. And even when I get into the docs themselves, there's certain sections that are like complete messes, right? Just random quotes, random questions, right? And I think, for me, I think what I'm realizing is that this is kind of normal to OI. I don't think OI is all about being clean necessarily. It's more about, like, hey, if I'm working on this pet project, so for example, let's say this item here with all these question marks, OI probably has gone through this, but the OI is like, look, at some point in the future, this pet project needs to be finished, right? There does need to be a resolution to that. And I think that's what I'm slowly trying to force myself to do as a, SI last. Similarly, right, for one of my more nerdy docs, this is kind of more OI to me, because, like, I kind of know this topic. I've thought about it for several years, and really I have everything defined. I have all the examples, and to someone on the outside, they'd be like, man, this is actually pretty organized, Reggie. But the only reason it's organized is because I've been spinning around this pet project for a better part of like a decade and a half, right? Or maybe a decade, maybe, And so for me, I already kind of knew where everything needed to go. But let's say if I were just starting, much like with that other doc I showed you, it would be way more messy. There'd be way more questions. But I guess the difference between OE and OI is that whereas OE is gathering like 50 different pet projects and not working on them, the OI is chipping away every single day at that one pet project until, it gets to a point where they're happy. So anyway, hopefully that makes sense. Again, this is a demon for me. I might not be fully representing it, but I do think this archetype, this imagery of the Batcave, of the trinkets in the cave, is a good way of understanding what Shan and Dave mean by OI, what Shan and Dave mean by pet projects. And hopefully, especially if you have demon OI, hopefully this can introduce you to another way of operating in the world where you can build in the shadows, let's say. And there's beauty and there's power that can be derived from that. So anyway, that was my little rant for today. Again, like I said, I might have to, do a round 2 or elaborate or, or things like that. But if you do have questions or comments, feel free to leave them. I am happy to learn what you have to say about this. And then if you have OI, especially if you have any way of elaborating, I would love to hear that as well. So other than that, I'm going to head out. I hope you guys are doing really well, and I will see you guys in a few. Take care.